2025 is coming to a close, which means we have all kinds of horror movies to talk about, recap, all that fun stuff. I'm gonna do a little three-part series going back throughout the year of 2025, talking about a lot of the crazy horror films we got. And we're kicking it off today with 10 underrated horror movies from this year, which will be followed by 10 movies that disappointed me, and then 10 movies that are my absolute favorite, my top 10 of the year. So today, let's talk about the underrated movies that didn't quite make it to my top 10, but they do deserve a little more love. Hey everybody, I'm Killjoy Jake, and instead of having friends, I have horror movies. If you're excited for upcoming horror flicks and TV shows, then make sure to like this video and subscribe for more updates, rankings, and reviews. Also, the best way to support this page is by becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter, where you'll get access to exclusive review videos. Patreon supporters even get to see unedited trailer reactions that YouTube won't allow me to post. Thank you all so much for keeping me in business. Now let's get to the rankings. Just to clarify before we get into these 10 movies, they're in no particular order at all. These are just 10 movies that I really liked that I feel like more people should see. Diving into our first pick here, talking a little bit about this year's Marshmallow, a movie that especially I felt like maybe flew under the radar for some of you after its limited theatrical release and almost going straight to VOD essentially. This pseudo-slasher flick follows a 12-year-old boy who starts to see a shadowy figure in the woods after hearing a spooky story at summer camp. While that plot description may seem basic, I promise you this movie is so much more than what meets the eye. With some pretty insane twists that actually make this one effective, horror fans will learn that this movie is only wearing the skin of a slasher to do something a little more sophisticated. Without spoiling anything, this movie ends up in a really interesting place, and my only gripe about the film in general is that it just didn't get there soon enough. I think if we had seen the entire third act be this thing that I'm talking about that is so cool, this new concept that this movie finds its way to a little sooner, maybe the whole third act was kind of that, I think this movie would have been like on everybody's top 10 list. Instead, this one just gets a little slow in the middle in my humble opinion, kind of loses steam a little bit, but again, picks up right in the last like couple of minutes. There is so much potential with an idea like this, and I hope these filmmakers get another crack at doing something similar. I still recommend this movie a ton though, and if you liked something like Weapons from this year that was constantly throwing different twists and turns at you, I think you'll absolutely love pairing it with Marshmallow. Next up is Jimmy and Stiggs, the first release from Eli Roth's new company, The Horror Section. The flick comes from director Joe Begos, who also wrote and stars in this alien splatter flick. The entire movie was shot DIY using only Joe's real-life apartment to film in. If you can look past the clear low budget and rough around the edges performances here, there's a really cool Evil Dead 2 or maybe even Brain Dead inspired flick here that is most effective at creating a very specific vibe. Joe Begos movies all feature this neon nightmare aesthetic, and this movie may capture it the very best out of everything from his catalog. I think if you're somebody who wants to make films one day, you gotta see Jimmy and Stiggs. This is bare bones as fuck, and it still works really well most of the time. I recommend this movie to folks who want to be filmmakers more than anything. This just proves that you can make a movie with the resources you have currently. You don't need a big Hollywood studio or a ton of money. You can make things literally in your apartment, and Joe Begos is doing that, releasing it into theaters like countrywide, which is crazy. Also, it's got a ton of gore and a great sense of humor, so if you like those two things as well, you're probably gonna vibe with this one. Moving on here, we have David Cronenberg's The Shrouds. This is a very personal meditation on grief, where David Cronenberg based a lot of the film on the feeling he had as he watched his real-life wife get buried at her funeral. As he put it, he wanted to jump in the casket with her. The Shrouds follows a businessman named Karsh, played by Vincent Cassel, who is the spitting image of Old Man Cronenberg. He creates a technological gravesite where you can watch your beloved decay in real time. Karsh's wife Becca is buried here, and he creeps out his date, showing her the live feed of his dead wife's decomposing body. From there, the movie surprisingly turns into an espionage thriller. I know, right? And it also gets super duper trippy, just like a lot of other David Cronenberg films. The body horror in Cronenberg films always has some sort of messaging behind it, and it is also there to gross you out, let's be honest. Here it feels a lot more sad and somber. You're watching as Becca is slowly dying in flashbacks, and that leads to some nasty body horror, but I don't know, it never made me feel gross. It just made me feel like, oh my god, like this is awful. I feel so bad. It's a terrible situation situation that I'm watching unfold here. The most effective thing about this movie, in my opinion, though, is that it's a very unique examination on grief. I feel like whenever we get movies like this, it's kind of the same thing. We do it in the exact same way, and I just feel like it's boring. If there's one more like staple scary metaphor for grief within a movie, like The Woman in the Yard, the Thing with Feathers from this year as well, if we get one more movie like that where it's just like a scary thing that represents grief, I'm gonna lose my mind. What's great about this movie is that it's not only very personal, but it gets really specific as well. This is about the specific loss of a sexual partner. I'm not trying to get weird, but this movie has a very heavy theme about like just sex and sexual stuff in general, and I think that's kind of like a big facet of this movie that doesn't get talked about in a lot of other grief stories similar to this. The Shrouds is clearly a catharsis for Cronenberg on missing his wife, which mixes themes of seduction, grief, and deception together in a really personal and unique way. Killer movie if you want to get absolutely bummed out. Maybe don't put it on until like the sun comes back out for a full cycle in a day. That seasonal depression is hitting hard, man. Even though I had a great time with The Monkey, I think Keeper was my personal favorite Oz Perkins flick from the entire year. I'm also super bummed that it got review bombed. Keeper might have a slightly predictable destination, but the journey is the best balanced horror story I think we've ever seen from Oz Perkins. You get moments of his campiness, which is edged out perfectly with some haunting gothic visuals. I think this movie is very comparable to something like Zach Crager's Barbarian for essentially swapping genres about halfway through. At first you think this is going to be some sort of modern psychological horror, but as sinister intentions are revealed, you realize this has been an Edgar Allan Poe inspired fairy tale the entire time. I feel like if you took Oz Perkins' other flick, Gretel and Hansel, and you mixed this with Lee Winnell's Invisible Man, you would get Keeper. The creature designs are terrifying. I think the quirkiness is balanced a lot better than in something like Longlegs, which personally I just feel like didn't have enough scares. That movie leaned way too much on the religious horror stuff that just personally doesn't really work for me. And I also think this is my absolute favorite performance I have ever seen from Tatiana Maslany so far. I don't know, man, this is my Longlegs. I loved Keeper. I think this is one of my favorite movies from Oz Perkins' catalog so far. I can't wait to see what he does next. Presence is another movie I feel like people missed back in January. It got a release like in the middle of a snowstorm, at least where I live, so maybe you missed this one. Definitely check it out if you didn't. Directed by Steven Soderbergh and written by David Coeb, this haunted house movie is told through the perspective of the spirit at the Payne residence. The struggling family deals with paranormal activity as well as tensions between each other. I cannot stress enough how much more interesting this movie was by essentially showing you a Conjuring-esque story unfold, but through a different perspective. The characters here don't feel like caricatures either, rather real people actually dealing with the situation in their own way. This movie is also very drama focused, like we're watching this family that's already had some problems now dealing with the fact that they have a ghost in the house. The ghost is what drew me in, but the fact that the drama works so well on top of that is just something that I think makes this movie really stand out. You wouldn't see something like this, this level of performances in something like The Conjuring. I think some folks may be disappointed that there's not really any jump scares, but there are certainly a lot of really creepy moments and a huge reveal at the end. If you're like an hour into this movie and you're like, I cannot believe Killjoy Jake recommended this to me, this movie fucking sucks, just watch until the end. Just please promise me you'll watch it till the end, because the twist makes this whole damn thing worth it. I had goosebumps all up and down my body. That reveal is why it's on today's list. No Conjuring jump scare has ever made me feel like that before. Grafted is another movie that kind of just came out of nowhere on Shudder very early on in the year, and I think because it's similar to a very popular horror flick from last year, that's why it's kind of flown under the radar for some. But oh my god, give this one a shot. The Sasha Rainbow flick follows an awkward but brilliant Chinese student named Wei, who wins a scholarship into a prestigious New Zealand university to study medical research and attempts to finish an experiment begun by her late father. Grafted feels like it would have came from Julia Ducournau if she took a handful of Molly. I could not give this very trippy body horror flick a better introduction. Outside of this year's Together, Grafted has to be one of the very best body horror flicks of 2025, getting just as thematic as it does gross. You can draw a lot of similarities between something like The Substance from last year to Grafted, which is why I think a lot of people kind of dismissed this one and just kind of chalked it up to just more of the same of that. But I think this one finds a very unique perspective on a very similar situation. You follow a character who is not only criticized by girls at her school for her looks and behavior, behavior, but more specifically her cultural background. Where the substance shows us a character who transforms her body to keep up with industry beauty standards, I think the horror in Grafted is more about someone capitulating to their new environment and losing their cultural identity. The experiment that Wei is working on this entire time is like taking anybody's skin essentially and making it graft to your own instantaneously. So there's a big plot point of this movie where Wei kills a very popular white girl at her school, removes her face, and then applies it to her own face, assuming her identity. There's a lot to be said with a controversial plot point like that. While this movie is super heavy on themes, it never feels like it's ever getting up on its soapbox either. It has a really bizarre sense of humor that I loved, and if you're into body horror like I am, you certainly will not be disappointed by this film's insane resolution. I loved this one, and I was grossed out by this one too, baby. I think that anyone saying that Eddington wasn't a horror film just simply didn't live through 2020. Ari Aster's pandemic Western thriller captures the horror of misinformation and how it especially plagued the beginning of this decade. I worked through the pandemic at Chipotle, and my god, it was hell not just because of the fear of maybe getting sick by this awful virus going around, but also the fact that so many people just would not listen to such a simple rule. This movie hit on the insanity of that time period better than anything quite like it. I think that's why this movie didn't make my top 10 list, is that it was just like too real. I never want to watch it again, but I will love it and respect it from afar. The film follows Joe Cross, Joaquin Phoenix, the sheriff of the small New Mexico town of Eddington. Fueled by his stubborn, unwavering beliefs that are only being boosted by the misinformation on his screens, he sets out on a bloody path to save his city. Now, obviously, this is a very political film, so it might not be your cup of tea if that's the case, but I do want to respond to a very interesting critique that this movie got. A lot of people called this movie centrist, not trying to blame one side or the other. I just strongly disagree with that. I think if you know Ari Aster's dark sense of humor, you know that the ending of this flick is one massive joke. I don't want to turn this into a major political thing, but there is very clearly something being said about this movie about one particular side. If there's anything I can possibly relay from this movie, however, it's just get your news from an actual reliable source and not news stations that have to be classified as entertainment because they make up so much shit. Next up is Dangerous Animals, which you have to talk about when it comes to 2025 horror. This is actually one of the very best shark movies of all time. There's not too many subgenres out there with a definitive best film, but when it comes to shark flicks, most of them suck, and Jaws is without question the best one. The brilliance of Dangerous Animals is its core concept, which takes on a more realistic approach, treating sharks as the animals that they are. The danger here is serial killer Tucker, played excellently by Jay Courtney and his lovely Australian accent. I could watch 100 more movies where this guy plays the killer just to listen to that voice. Damn. If they ever need a younger Mick Taylor for some sort of prequel in Wolf Creek, he's your guy. Tucker kidnaps locals, and after chumming the waters out on the ocean, he feeds people to bull sharks while capturing it all on camera. This has to be one of the most unique shark horror movies of all time, because you're not making the shark the actual villain. I think everyone knows by now that real-life sharks aren't exactly bloodthirsty monsters. They don't even like the taste of humans and don't attack us to feed, only to protect themselves. By chumming the water, Tucker is tricking the sharks into biting into people and attacking them. I like that he's also got a Peach Fuzz from Creep thing going on here, where he's filming all of his victims getting eaten alive. I can't wait for the spin-off show, The Tucker Tapes. Okay, but actually, I would totally watch that. Although I do think it gets a little preachy with how it wraps up, taking way too long to make the same point again on how sharks are just animals, this movie is still a bloody great thriller. There's even a very standout moment of body horror here that doesn't involve sharks at all. If you've seen the movie, you definitely know what I'm talking about. It's a really shocking plot point that makes you respect Final Girl Zephyr. I would go so far as to say that Zephyr has earned a spot on the best of Final Girls list of all time just for this scene alone. I never saw Laurie Strode do that, I'm just saying. Second to last on our list here is Ash from Flying Lotus. John Carpenter may never make that live-action Dead Space movie that he's teased multiple times now, but thankfully Flying Lotus did it himself. What feels like a pastiche of Alien and The Thing, Ash follows Rhea, who wakes up on a mysterious planet to discover her crewmates have been slaughtered. When a man arrives to rescue her, played by Aaron Paul, an ordeal of psychological and physical terror ensues. According to my comment section, this is my hottest take of the year. Everybody found this film to be super boring, boring and nothing happens apparently. I completely disagree. I was enamored to this flick by the first time I saw it. I've seen it a few more times on Shudder now. I love, love, love Ash. I agree that the middle part of this movie does slow down a little bit, but man, the third act is so worth it. This movie is not only cinematically beautiful and filled with vibrant, bright colors like so many movies nowadays refuse to be, but it is also filled with nasty looking alien monsters by the time we get to the end. Like I was saying earlier, this movie is very alien inspired, and that movie is a lot of setup to get to a very big payoff at the end. Ash is very similar to that. Also, to any Dead Space fans out there, you gotta see this one. It is very, very, very similar to that concept. I can't explain this, but after watching this movie, I just really want Flying Lotus to be my dad. I don't know how else to explain it. That would be nice. That would be a cool thing. Sorry, Dad, I love you. And last but not least is probably my favorite slasher film of the entire year, Silent Night, Deadly Night 2025, baby. Santa Claus killing Nazis is enough for me to recommend this to anybody. Are you kidding me? Let's go. I loved this reimagining of this iconic Santa slasher that gives Billy Chapman a much better origin story as opposed to being blatantly crazy. Instead of yelling punish at his victims, Rowan Campbell whispers naughty. That sounds really goofy, but I actually feel like it applies really well to this reinvention of the character. He's a lot more subtle with the crazy things going on in his brain, even though the concept is way more outlandish. Rowan Campbell plays this character with a lot more nuance, having this supernatural voice in his head pointing out the evil people he must kill. It's more than just a frailty knockoff too. There's a big twist that comes sometime towards the second act, which I won't spoil here. All I'll say about it is that instead of having a religious spin like the Bill Paxton flick, there's more of this like moral compass element to this movie that I think was really interesting. I will say though, this movie is very similar to Venom, if like Venom was a slasher villain essentially, but like I can't complain. This is way better than the Tom Hardy movies. Silent Night, Deadly Night is super bloody, over the top, and one of the very best slasher flicks of the entire year, hands down. For me, this totally redeemed Rowan Campbell after his performance in Halloween Ends. Thankfully, there is no chocolate milk or band kid bullies here. Ruby Modine also deserves her flowers here as well, being a major staple in the genre for a long time now. Don't forget, she was the killer in Happy Death Day. It's cool to see director Mike Nelson work with the Modines again, as Matthew Modine, Ruby's papa, was a main player in the Wrong Turn remake from 2021, another criminally underrated horror flick from this decade. That's my list for underrated horror flicks from this year, but oh boy, we got a few more coming up. 10 movies that disappointed me is up next, and then after that, my top 10 of the entire year. Hopefully you'll see all these videos this week, but I don't know, man. We got Christmas and Christmas Eve, so shit's gonna get busy. What movies did you feel like were underrated from this year? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe, and as always, don't forget to kill it out there, y'all.